I use the word animal in its widest sense, as including the physical, not more than the moral and vital being. I repeat that the leading principle of involvement consisted with us in immediately investing and holding in perpetual abeyance all the animal's functions subjected to the process. To be brief, in whatever condition the individual was at the period of involvement, in that condition he remained. Now, as it is my good fortune to be of the blood of the Scarabaeus, I was embalmed alive, as you see me as present. The blood of the Scarabaeus! Exclaimed Dr. Plenhonour. Yes, the Scarabaeus was the insignium, or the arms, of a very distinguished and very rare patrician family. To be of the blood of the Scarabaeus, it is merely to be one of that family of which the Scarabaeus is the insignium. I speak figuratively. But what has this to do with your being alive? Why, it is the general custom in Egypt to deprive a corpse before embalmment of its bowels and brains. The race of the Scarabaei alone did not coincide with the custom. Had I not been a Scarabaeus, therefore, I should not have been without bowels and brains, and without either it is inconvenient to live. I perceive that, said Dr. Buckingham, and I presume that all the entire mummies that come to hand are of the race of the Scarabaei. Beyond doubt. I thought, said Mr. Glidden very meekly, that the Scarabaeus was one of the Egyptian gods? One of the Egyptian what? Exclaimed the mummy, starting to its feet. Gods, repeated the traveller. Mr. Glidden, I really am astonished to hear you talk in this style, said the Count, resuming his chair. No nation upon the face of the earth has ever acknowledged more than one god. The Scarabaeus, the ibis, etc., were with us, as similar creatures have been with others. The symbols or media through which we were offered worship to the Creator are too august to be more directly approached. There was here a pause. At length the colloquy was renewed by Dr. Ponnonner. It is not improbable, then, from what you have explained, said he, that among the catacombs near the Nile there may exist other mummies of the Scarabaeus tribe in condition of vitality. There can be no question of it, replied the Count. All the Scarabaei embalmed while alive are alive. Even some of those purposely so embalmed may have been overlooked by their executors and still remain in the tomb. Will you be kind enough to explain, I said, what you mean by purposely so embalmed? With great pleasure, answered the mummy, after surveying me leisurely through his eyeglass, for it was the first time I had ventured to address him a direct question. With great pleasure, he said. The usual duration of man's life in my time was about 800 years. Few men died unless by extraordinary accident before the age of 600. Few lived longer than a decade of centuries, but 8 were considered a natural term. After the discovery of the embalming principle, as I've already described to you, it occurred to our philosophers that a laudable curiosity might be gratified, and at the same time the interests of science much advanced, by living this natural term in installments. In the case of history, indeed, experience demonstrated that something of this kind was indispensable. An historian, for example, having attained the age of 500, would write a book with great labor and then get himself carefully embalmed, leaving instructions to his executors pro tem that they should cause him to be revivified after the lapse of a certain period, say 500 or 600 years. Resuming the existence at the expiration of this time, he would invariably find his great work converted into a species of haphazard notebook. That is to say, into a kind of literary arena for the conflicting guesses, riddles, and personal squabbles of the whole herds of exasperated commentators. These guesses, etc., which passed under the name of annotations or emendations, were found so completely to be enveloped, distorted, and overwhelmed the text that the author had to go about with a lantern to discover his own book. When discovered, it was never worth the trouble of the search. After rewriting it throughout, it was regarded as the bounden duty of the historian to set himself to work immediately in correcting, from his own private knowledge and experience, the traditions of the day concerned with the epoch at which he had originally lived. Now, this process of rescription and personal rectification, pursued by various individual sages from time to time, had the effect of preventing our history from degenerating into absolute fable. "I beg your pardon," said Dr. Ponnonner at this point, laying his hand gently upon the arm of the Egyptian. "I beg your pardon, sir, but may I presume to interrupt you for one moment?" "By all means, sir," replied the Count, drawing up. "I may wish to ask you a question," said the doctor. "You mentioned this historian's personal correction of traditions respecting his own epoch. Pray, sir, upon an average, what proportion of these Kabbalah were usually found to be right?" "The Kabbalah, as you properly term it, sir, were generally discovered to be precise on a par with the facts recorded in unrewritten histories themselves. That is to say, not one individual iota was either was ever found, under any circumstances, to be not totally and radically wrong." "But since it is quite clear," resumed the doctor, "that at least 5,000 years have elapsed since your entombment, I take it for granted that your histories at that period, if not your traditions, were sufficiently explicit on that one topic of universal interest, the creation, which took place, as I presume you are aware, only about 10 centuries before." "Sir," said the Count Allan Mistako. The doctor repeated his remarks, but it was only after much additional explanation that the foreigner could be made to comprehend them. The latter at length said hesitatingly, "The ideas you suggest are to me, I confess, utterly novel. During my time I never knew anyone to entertain so singular a fancy as that universe, or this world, if you will have it so, ever having a beginning at all. I remember once, and once only, hearing something remotely hinted by a man of many speculations concerning the origin of the human race. And by this individual the very word atom, or red earth, which you make use of, was employed. He employed it, however, in a generical sense, with reference to the spontaneous germination from rank soil, just as thousands of the lower genera of creatures are germinated. The spontaneous germination, as I say, of 5 vast hordes of men, simultaneously upspringing in 5 distinct and nearly equal divisions of the globe. Here in general, the company shrugged their shoulders, and one or two of us touched our foreheads with a very significant air. Mr. Silk Buckingham first glanced slightly at the occupant and then at the syncopate of Allan, spoke as follows. The long duration of human life in your time, together with the occasional practice of passing it, as you have explained in installments, must have had indeed a strong tendency to the general development and conglomeration of knowledge. I presume, therefore, that we are to attribute the marked inferiority of the old Egyptians in all particulars of science, when compared with the moderns, and more especially with the Yankees, altogether to the superior solidity of the Egyptian skull. I confess again, replied the Count with much suavity, that I am somewhat at a loss to comprehend you. Pray, to what particulars of science do you allude? Here the whole party, joining voices, detailed at great length the assumptions of phrenology and the marvels of animal magnetism. Having heard us to our end, the Count proceeded to relate a few anecdotes, which rendered it so evident that prototypes of Gaul and Spurzheim had flourished and faded in Egypt so long ago as to have been nearly forgotten, and that the maneuvers of Mesmer were really very contemptible trips when put in correlation with the positive miracles of the Theban savants, who created lice and a great many other similar things. I here asked the Count if his people were able to calculate eclipses. He smiled rather contemptuously, and he said they were. This put me a little out, and I began to make other inquiries in regard to his astronomical knowledge, when a member of the company, who had never as yet opened his mouth, whispered in my ear that for information on this head I had better consult Ptolemy, whoever Ptolemy is, as well as one Plutarch, de Face Luni. I then questioned the mummy about burning glasses and lenses, and in general about the manufacture of glass, but had not made an end of my queries before the silent member again touched me quietly on the elbow and begged me, for God's sake, to take a peep at the Diodorus Siculus. As for the Count, he merely asked me in the way of a reply if we moderns possessed any such microscopes as would enable us to cut cameos in the style of the Egyptians. While I was thinking how I should answer this question, the little Dr. Paunotter committed himself in a very extraordinary way. Look at our architecture, he exclaimed, greatly to the indignation of both the travelers, who pinched him black and blue to no purpose. Look, he cried with enthusiasm, at the Bowling Green fountain in New York. Or, if this be too vast a contemplation, regard for a moment the Capitol of Washington, D.C. And the good little medical man went on to detail, very minutely, the proportions of the fabric to which he referred. He explained that the portico alone was adored with no less than 24 columns, 5 feet in diameter and 10 feet apart. The Count said that he regretted not being able to remember just at that moment the precise dimensions of any one of the principal buildings of the city of Asnak, whose foundations were laid in the night of time, but the ruins were still standing, of which, at the epoch of his entombment, in a vast plain of sand to the westward of Thebes. He recollected, however, talking of the porticos, that one affixed to an inferior palace in the kind of suburb called Karnak consisted of 144 columns, 37 feet in circumference, and 25 feet apart.